Okay, good morning. This is just a quick take for information that passed my desk, quick news feeds, the 25th of August. The two things I'd like to discuss are 30-year-old embryos and polygenic embryo testing. So as always, this is a welcome and a disclaimer. My name's James Stange. I've got a PhD in embryology and I've been working in the field for more than 50 years. The videos that I'm making for my Fertile YouTube channel are my attempt to bridge the gap between information you may need for your fertility treatment and the most recent publications available to your clinics. I'm not a medical person, and this information is not medical advice, but it may help you in knowing what questions to ask about your treatment with your doctor, and maybe to help in understanding the advice that you receive. I hope it does help. And like always, this is a page that I've allocated for potential supporters of IVFDaily. Whilst I'm just starting out, if you want to promote your company or clinical product, this may be the page that you can do that. In supporting my IVFDaily channel, your support may mean an IVF client becoming a better informed IVF client. You can click subscribe, become a sponsor, or just make a donation to help others on their fertility journey. So this is the thing I've started just recently, quick news bites. A lot of news feeds cross my desk every week about IVF, but this article in the Washington Examiner caught my eye, and there is a link to the article. And there are two items. The first one is talking about a 30-year-old pregnancy. And I'm going to read from the quote from the paper. In July, the MIT Technology Review reported the world's oldest baby, Thaddeus Daniel Pierce, had been born after his embryo had been stored in a freezer for over 30 years. Thaddeus's biological mother, Linda Arkerd, had created 4 embryos in 1994 amid her own fertility issues. One embryo, Thaddeus's biological sister, was transferred to Linda's uterus and born early in 1995. The other 3 embryos, including Thaddeus, remained in the freezer for the next 30 years. It's interesting, by the way, that they're already giving this embryo that had not yet been implanted a name, Thaddeus. Not wanting to see her embryos discarded or given for scientific research, Linda reached out to various embryo adoption agencies and eventually connected with the Snowflakes Embryo Adoption Program of the Nightlight Christian Adoption Agency. Wow. It was through this program, specifically the Open Hearts program for embryos that are difficult to place due to age or other factors, that Lindsay and Tim Pierce, Thaddeus's future adoptive parents, were informed about Linda's embryos. With the help of Rejoice Fertility in Knoxville, Tennessee, the Pierces were able to give Linda's embryos a chance at life. From Linda's 3 remaining embryos, 1 failed to grow after being thawed, and the 2 remaining embryos were transferred to Linda's uterus on November 14, 2024, 30 years and 6 months after they had been created, and incidentally, when Lindsay and Tim were less than 6 years old. That's kind of scary. And one, Thaddeus, developed into a fetus. So the first comment that crossed my mind was the freezing technology in 1990 involved slow freezing and slow thawing, but all the stuff these days would have been skilled in vitrification and rapid warming. So it's pleasing to see that some staff still had sufficient skills to thaw the embryo during the slow thawing process, which is quite difficult to do. And that it's also a reminder that there will be a lot of embryos in freezers all around the world that have been frozen by non-vitrification means. The second thing that crossed my mind was that there are organisations whose focus appears to be outreaching for embryo donation outliers. And so there's a whole business of embryo donation which is occurring behind the scenes that most clinics are not aware of, where embryos are being donated, and it's got to do with transfer of information such that the children born from embryo donation can always find their biological parents. And the scary thing is that the recipients were only 6 years old when the embryos were created. We only have to go forward 10 years, 2035, and embryos will be donated before the parents were actually even born. We need to stop and think about that. The second item on in the article was genetic testing of embryos, and I'll quote, earlier this month, New York Times columnist Ross Dohart interviewed the founder of Orchid, a company that offers whole genome sequencing to identify possible genetic errors in embryos created by IVF. For a mere $2,500, Orchid will sequence more than 99% of an embryo's DNA to screen for risks such as neurodevelopment disorders and birth defects. Presumably, with this information at hand, the parents of the embryo will then decide whether to transfer the embryo to a uterus or to discard or give the embryos for scientific research. And there's a link to Orchid Health. And I don't know at this point whether 2,500 is for all the embryos or any specific embryo. So if you have 6 embryos, that's going to be quite expensive and quite profitable for Orchid too, I should imagine. So the article goes on. In the interview, the Orchid's founder, Noor Sedkiu, said that Orchid has absolutely zero to do with discarding embryos, no responsibility at all, and that any decision to discard lies exclusively with the parents. She even goes so far as to say that the decision not to implant an embryo after discovering its risks for a disease such as adult onset blindness is a positive moral choice. What should be done with these embryos after making this positive moral choice, she fails to say. And then, of course, the article finishes up by saying it took less than 50 years to go from creating embryos for patients struggling with infertility to screening embryos for desirable genetic traits and discarding those without them. It is difficult to imagine where the road to having a baby by any means necessary will lead us. However, the story of couples such as Lindsay and Tim Pearce and the organisations such as Nightlife Christian Adoption gives us hope that, despite the moral harms that may already have been done by IVF, it may still be redeemed. But I'd just like to make a comment about genetic testing of embryos. Now, I may be wrong, but this is what I understand to be polygenic testing. And as I understand it, the genetic profile for PGD is used by the company to screen for a vast array of genetic markers for a whole list of conditions, similar to what occurs when one has their DNA tested. So it's actually taking material already being generated by PGTA and then reassessing it, not for euploidy, but for genetic markers. While it is understandable that clients may want the best for their future child, adding this burden to so few euploid embryos will be difficult for many couples. I remember when we were doing sex selection in the 90s before it was banned, and couples coming on wanting a female embryo, and the only good embryos were male embryos, and at that point, the couples had to make a decision whether to accept a poor quality embryo of what they wanted or a better quality embryo for the ones they didn't. It is a very difficult choice for couples, and it has to be done fairly quickly. If there is a family history, then maybe there is value in this technology. The real concern for me will be that fertile couples attending to what is already very busy clinics wanting IVF. Just think of the vast numbers of unwanted euploid embryos in storage. It's a nightmare. I believe clinics need to start developing protocols to address this development. Will there be a new industry involved in flawed embryo donation? So I'd just like to thank you. Just a quick news bites. As I always finish up, IVF is a personal journey that involves the action of many different people and arguments. It helps to understand that all the aspects of that journey, and I hope this information will be of value. If you like the information provided, please tell other clients about this service and please subscribe. Thank you.